Well, this past Monday, the Philadelphia Inquirer printed an article worth reading. It talks about the relationship between Penn State sociology professor Sam Richards and an ordinary Iraqi man, Bassem Razzo. See, one night, some years ago, Razzo stumbled upon a TEDx talk, a lecture called A Radical Experiment in Empathy. The speaker, half a world away, was Professor Richards. Imagine, Richards told his audience, being an ordinary Arab Muslim in Iraq or elsewhere in the Middle East and seeing your country invaded and ravaged by war. Can you feel their anger, their fear, their rage at what has happened to their country? Can you imagine what you would feel? If you can, that's empathy. Step outside of your little world, Richard says. Step inside the tiny world of someone else. Razzo was one of those Arab Muslims. And he was so struck by the professor's talk that he emailed Richards, praising him for getting it right. And thus, their correspondence was born. And then in 2012, Richards enlisted Razzo to speak to his class remotely, patching him in and bridging not just the 6,000 miles between that central Pennsylvanian college town and the ancient Middle Eastern city, but also bridging the political and cultural chasm between their countries. Razzo's on-screen appearance became a staple in Richards' course at State College every semester after that. That is, until the night of the accident. Well, that's what Razzo calls the September 20th, 2015 bombing. The one that killed his wife and his daughter, his brother, his nephew. The one that destroyed his house and broke his hip and foot and injured his back. The one by U.S. forces that challenged his views on empathy and forgiveness. Now, hearing of the tragedy, Professor Richards reached out to Razzo. See, the two men had corresponded for years, but in a slightly detached, almost collegial way. Their talks about life in their respective countries had typically been framed as a sociological conversation. But the bombing removed any remaining barriers, and their conversations became deeply personal. 6 months after the bombing, Richards asked Razzo if he would resume his talks with Penn State students. And at first, Razzo declined. But then, a little bit more than a year after the bombing, Razzo felt ready. While his previous guest appearances, though, were about living in Iraq and the conditions of being in a war zone, this talk was all about that deadly bombing. And when it was over, the students told Professor Richards that they wanted to hear more. They wanted to meet Razzo. And a week after Razzo spoke to Richards' class just this past fall, Richards asked him to come to Penn State. And he agreed. And so on Wednesday, April 11th of this year, he and Richards walked into that Penn State lecture hall together. And Richard said to the crowd, "I want to introduce you to my friend, Basim." Razzo spoke for over an hour. He told his story, and he encouraged students to see other parts of the world and to see and feel as others do. "Empathy," he said, "made me meet this guy," as he pointed to Richards. "I believe in empathy. You have to put yourself in the shoes of another before you do anything." This experience can serve as a spiritual lesson for us, to draw us more deeply into the lives of others in a way that goes beyond the superficial. This morning's passage from 1 John reminds us that empathy is one of the essential characteristics of a Christ-like life. How does God's love abide in anyone who has the world's goods and sees a brother or sister in need and yet refuses help? Little children, let us love, not in words and speech, but in truth and action. The world is full of brothers and sisters experiencing pain and suffering. But when we encounter it, we can become callous and indifferent. We can train ourselves to avert our gaze from people who are hurting and to focus only on ourselves or our own interests. But that's the way of the hired hand. The hired hand sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and runs away. The hired hand runs away because a hired hand does not care for the sheep. But not the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. And that is how we know love. The life and death of Jesus is how we know love. And knowing this then calls us to empathize with the suffering of others. You know, empathy is feeling what someone else feels. Empathy is seeing the world from the perspective of another. Empathy is grasping as fully as possible what someone else experiences. In the New Testament letter to the Hebrews, the author writes, "Remember those who are in prison, as though you were in prison with them. Those who are being tortured, as though you yourselves were being tortured." A colleague points out that the writer is appealing to our empathetic imaginations. I mean, we're not just to feel sorry for those in need. We are to feel with those in need as if the burden has become our own. As followers of Jesus, we are to feel the pain of others as if it existed in our own bodies. Another great example of empathy is Nasir Sobhani, better known as the street's barber. He gives free haircuts to homeless people. He says, people walk by them like they're nothing. And sometimes they don't even feel like they exist. But it's a good feeling when you can make someone feel like a human. He says, I'll do what I can to make someone feel clean. And I'm hoping with a clean cut, I can spark a clean start to someone's life. And if not just a haircut, I'll do a face shave. And if not just a face shave, I'll do a full treatment. Dry shampoo. I'll put essential oils in their hair. It's a beautiful experience to connect with someone on the streets while grooming them, making them feel good. This is what we're destined to do as human beings, he says, to find our talent and then to use that to benefit humankind. I promise, every single person out there, if you focus on other people and not on yourself, this is the best feeling. And isn't that what laying down our lives is all about? Focusing on other people and not on ourselves? And it feels good. That's the counterintuitive nature of empathy. The beautiful truth is that when we empathize with another, when we walk in their shoes and seek to understand their experiences, we bring healing with us. Sometimes I think it's too easy to block out the pain of others. I mean, perhaps we're too busy with our own lives that we don't realize the suffering around us. We don't see the wolves prowling. Or perhaps life is going so well for us, and we're afraid that the suffering of others will bring us down. Or maybe we believe that the suffering of another was brought upon by himself, and he deserves what he's getting. Or perhaps we view the one who suffers as an adversary. But not one major religion suggests turning away from suffering. All say the opposite. They recognize that suffering is a part of life and that reaching out to people in pain not only helps heal the one who suffers, but also enriches the life of the one who reaches out. This is how a world of hurt turns into a world of healing. How death on the cross turns into an empty grave. Jesus urges us to have empathy for others, but he's not saying strike a bargain like I'll scratch your back if you'll scratch mine. He's saying abide in my love. A love you know because I am the good shepherd and I have laid down my life for you and for the whole world. So, may you live your life for others, for the sheep in this fold and for the sheep who do not belong to this fold. May you take the risk of being compassionate toward others. And may you practice walking in another's shoes. But remember, if you do, you'll open up new possibilities, and you'll do wonders for your own soul. Thanks be to God. Amen.